How emotional are you? It seems to me that there are two types of people. There are some people that wear their emotions wherever they go. They only have to look and see a beautiful sunset, and they're in floods of tears. They only have to look at the beauty of the ocean, and they're already adding to it by crying more tears. Some people are very emotional, and other people are stoic. Some people are very emotional, and other people, sometimes if you see their mouth move a few millimeters, that's as good as it's going to get. That's the closest you're going to get to a smile or laughter. Some people are very emotional, and other people hide and bury it down very well. Some people are really calm and subdued, and whatever happens in life, they seem to act the same. Other people, the moment something goes wrong, the fuse is lit, and they are furious. They go from 0 to 100 on the anger scale very quickly. As we continue looking at the story of Joseph, what I want us to see here is, however logical we think we are, however much we think that we might be like Mr. Spock, making rational decisions all the time, what we see in the life of Joseph is how much of the story is driven by human emotion. And as we look at this element of the story, I want us to look at the painful, perfect providence of God in the life of Joseph through the lens of 4 very negative emotions. I think there are 4 states that we see in this part of the story that highlight to us how things are unraveling. But I want you to remember, because it is a depressing story, a lot goes wrong in the next few verses. But in all of it, in every part of the Genesis narrative, in every part of your lives today, Christian, is not Jesus Christ on the throne today? Is God not in control? And so I want us to see the awful and tragic events that unfold in the book of Joseph, in the story and the life of Joseph. But I want us to see that behind everything and in everything, God is at work. Not forgetting his people, not neglecting them. He's at work. And if he was at work in the Genesis account, is he not at work still today in your lives? My first point, my first emotion is hatred, anger. Anger and hatred and jealousy, they all seem to mingle together, and they bring us ultimately the reason why these events are kick-started. Now, we looked at last week the most dysfunctional family you can ever imagine. There's Jacob, who's had a difficult past with his family, who's living with his 4 wives, his many children and daughters, but he's got one favorite. And he makes his favoritism so obvious that the other siblings hate him. They despise Joseph. And what we see now even from verse 12, we see Jacob's favoritism explored and elaborated in a greater way. Verse 12 says, "Now the brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem." So where are the brothers? They're out in the fields. They're working. They're shepherding. They're guarding from wolves or thieves or attackers. They're in Shechem, so they're quite a far away from home. We don't know how difficult the labor or the work has been, but we know that it's such sufficient work that it takes a lot of brothers to go and to carry out the family business. Where's Joseph? Well, we read in verse 13 that Israel said to Joseph. Israel is another name for Jacob. So where's Joseph? He's in the Father's presence. His brothers are all working hard, laboring to keep the family alive. And where's Joseph? He's too good to work. He's not like the other brothers. Joseph is special. And every day that the brothers toiled and worked and struggled, Joseph might have just sat in his father's house. The brothers' actions were not motivated because Joseph had a nice fancy coat. Sometimes if we engage in the media, if we watch the films or if we grew up in Sunday school, that's how it's portrayed. Jacob had a coat and they hated him because of his coat. No. They hated him partly because of how the father loved Joseph in a way he didn't love them. The father's sin of favoritism has caused this hatred to bubble up amongst the brothers. Now in our story, Jacob calls Joseph, and this is in verse 14. Jacob calls Joseph and says, "Son, go to your other brothers, see how they're doing, and come back and give me a report on them." Not only is Joseph not engaging in the work of his brothers, the father is now going to send Joseph to walk round the brothers, take some notes on his little clipboard and write it down, and then he's going to go back to the father and give a report on them. Not only is Joseph not expected to work in the fields like the other brothers, he's now going as like a supervisor or a foreman to them. Again, we see such unwisdom. Parents here today, do not treat your children against each other like this. It is clearly wrong and it is clearly sinful, and these sinful actions build the hatred in the hearts of the brothers. Now, because we're so familiar with this story, when we read verse 18, I think we forget how cold, how evil, how unpredictable this is. So often the Bible stories that we know the best are often the ones that we approach mechanically. Right, so Joseph is going to go to his brothers, they're going to try and kill him, they're going to throw him in a well. Right, I know this story, I've read this before. Hey, let's just stop. His own family can see no conflict resolution except death to our brother. For those of you with siblings, imagine if all of your brothers and sisters conspired in a huddle together and said, well, there's only one way to deal with that annoying person, isn't there? This is shocking. The hatred required to turn on your own family. Verse 18, they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. There's lots of important things here. Number one, they saw him coming from afar. Well, I think that's quite obvious. They'd be looking at the green hills, and all of a sudden there'd be yellow and red. And I'm not going to carry on with the song. But of course they saw him. His coat is magnificent and colourful. And as he is approaching them from a distance, they see the coat, which is a symbol of the Father's love that they don't have. And before Joseph utters a word, the brothers decide death is the only option. Now, I love reading stories like this because it makes me feel really good about myself. Now, my brother and I, we might have had lots of fallings out when we were younger, but I never once tried to kill him. And so, I can't remember if I did anyway. But we can read this story and we can think, right, Joseph brothers bad, me good. That's a good story, isn't it? But friends, all of this led and began by jealousy, which led to hatred, and this hatred and anger festered and bubbled up. Let us read the words of Jesus. Matthew 5 and verse 21 and 22. You have heard it said that you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Now, you might not have murdered any of your siblings, but there might have been a time when there was hatred in your heart. Maybe in church life, someone has really upset you and really annoyed you, and you've not tried to kill them. You've been very restrained, but in your heart, you hate them. Or maybe in the workplace, your boss has dealt with you unjustly, and you just hate them. You might not have acted upon it, but Jesus says you're liable to judgment if you commit murder and if you hate in your heart. I don't want us to think, the brothers are useless and pathetic and I'm great and righteous. The reality is we have all fallen in this area. We have all been angry and hated people. And that is why ultimately, friends, we need Jesus Christ. We need the Messiah to save us because we have all fallen. And the danger with our hatred is it starts off small and we let it grow and we let it fester and we don't take it to God. We don't pray about it. We let it build and eventually that small bit of anger towards somebody has engulfed our lives. That's what happened with the brothers. The more they thought, the more they pondered on it, the more they looked at Joseph, the more they hated him. Friends, Christians, if there is hatred or anger in your heart, you must deal with it before it takes root. Because once it takes root, you might act on your hatred. A sharp word to someone, gossiping behind their back, excluding them from things. It might not be as severe as murder, but hatred will come out if it is within you. Christians, root out the sin in your life. But they didn't just hate Joseph because of his favoritism. They despised God's plan and providence for Joseph and for them. They didn't just hate Joseph because the father loved him. They hated Joseph because of his dreams. Look at what they say in verse 19. Here comes the dreamer. What a mocking way to put it. Look at how they put it in verse 20. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams. They wanted to kill Joseph because when Joseph died, his dreams died. They wanted to snuff out the dreams that Joseph had. And what were the dreams from God? Joseph's dreams were messages from God to Joseph. Many of us might be struggling with the plans that God has for us right now. Many of us might be struggling with what we are going through in life. Some of us might hate the situations that we are in. Some of us might be overwhelmed by the pain, by physical illness, by mental illness, by grief, by hurt and injustice. We might be hating the plans and the providence of God. Because that's what the brothers hated. God had said this is going to happen, and the brothers said, nope, we're going to stop it. And the whole story and life of Joseph is basically one unraveling of God's plan. Nothing that anyone can do can change or stop the plan of God. God's plan will come to pass. And God's plan, remember the title of my whole series, it is painful, but it is perfect providence. In your life, in your pains, in your struggles, there is a reason for it. There is a hope in your circumstance. There is a purpose for your suffering. There is a reason. We believe God has a plan for us. We don't believe in accidental cause. We don't believe, oh, well, you've been unlucky in life, sorry about that. We believe that in every situation, God is working out his perfect plan for us. And sometimes he leads us through dark valleys, but he will lead us out the other side. God's plan is being unfolded. Christian, ensure that you do not hold any hatred or resentment to God and his plans for us. The second sort of emotion that overtakes them is greed. They strip Joseph. They throw him into a pit that he cannot get out of. What would you do next? You've just assaulted your brother. You've just beaten him up. You've thrown him in a pit and you've left him for dead. What would you do? Maybe you'd be sitting there going, oh no. Oh, no. How do I fix it? How do I deal with it? How do I cover it up? How do I hide it? How can I explain my actions to my father? I wonder what your reaction would be. For most of us in this situation, we would react in absolute blind panic. We would be overwhelmed by guilt. But it is not guilt that overwhelms the brothers, but greed. What is their response in verse 25? They sat down to eat. They had a meal. They've just tried to kill their brother. They've thrown him now into a pit in which he is trapped in, and they just go about their day. Do you want a picnic? We'll just carry on. Is anyone feeling a bit peckish today? There's no emotion. There's no guilt. It seems so callous. They care more about their stomachs than they do their own brother. And the more we learn about sin, the more we lean into sin, the more we practice sin, the more we live out in a way that God tells us not to, the more our consciences get warped. As Christians, we need to be a people that are rooting out sin. Sometimes Christians are very good at rooting out sin in other people. Oh, we can see what's wrong with so-and-so over there, can't we? We know exactly what that sinner needs. Friends, root out sin in your life first. The more we practice sin, the more we give in to sin, the more it changes and affects and warps our consciences. They have no regret or remorse. They just feast. They eat. They go about their every day. Now, some people compare the stripping of Joseph, the beating of Joseph, as being a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ. That Joseph was stripped naked and beaten, Jesus was stripped and beaten, and therefore the two are similarities. That Joseph is echoing what Jesus Christ is going to do. And there's a lot of people that read through the Genesis account a bit like that. Personally, I don't quite see it that way. Jesus went to the cross silently. Jesus didn't beg for his life. Jesus didn't plead for his life. Jesus silently and willingly went to the cross. Jesus was spat at. He was beaten. He was mocked. He was stripped. And he willingly went to the cross, offering up his life to bring about salvation for all who will call upon his name. Joseph did not act like that. We don't read it in this account, but later on in Genesis 42 and verse 21, we read these words, and actually they're quite harrowing. This is talking about the brothers in Genesis 42 and verse 21. Then they said to one another, in truth we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That makes it even worse, doesn't it? Joseph is in distress. They can see it. Joseph is begging for his life. And they're there having a lovely picnic as the screams of their brother goes up from the pit. Joseph begged and begged his brothers, and they ignored him. I don't think we see a similarity here between Joseph and Jesus. I think we see a contrast. How much more wonderful is it that the Savior did not argue for his own life, but died that we might have life instead of him. What a gracious Christ we have. And so they have their lovely meal, but their greed goes further. They see then some caravans of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with all of their wares to sell, and they think, you know what would look good? You know what would be great? Not just if we got rid of the dreamer, but if we got some money for it as well. And so they sell Joseph. Verses 26 and 27, Judah, who we're going to see a lot more of later, Judah convinces his brothers to sell Joseph. At least that way they'll make some money from it. And so they sell him for 20 shekels. 20 shekels is roughly about 200 pounds. 200 pounds between what, 9 of them? It's not very much money, is it? Potentially 8 of them, but 200 pounds is not going to go very far. It's not life-changing money. It's pounds. And yet their greed valued money over the life of another human being, their own brother. Greed had sunk into their heart. And I want to pick this up now. Judah is a right sinner. Judah is awful. He is terrible. And yet through the line of Judah comes the Messiah, Jesus Christ. In the same family tree as this wicked man comes Jesus Christ. And as we look at the life of Joseph, we see not just that God had a plan for Joseph, we're going to see God had a plan for Judah. God had a plan for the brothers. God had a plan for the whole of Egypt. And God has a salvation plan for the world. Through this family, salvation will come. And so in greed, they sell Joseph. My third sort of emotion or state is deceit. They commit this greed out of their hatred, and now they've got to lie about it. They've got to cover it up. Christian, when you commit a sin, rarely does it ever come alone. So often we'll do something wrong, and then to hide that we've done something wrong, what do? We do something wrong to hide the fact we've done something wrong. And then we have to cover up that lie with another lie. The brothers are caught in a cycle of sin. And the only way to break the cycle of deceit is to bring their sin out into the light. To talk to people about it. To go to God with their sin. Friends, we must not fall into a cycle of regular, habitual sin. We must break any cycles of sin. Because even as Christians, it becomes very easy and routine to fall into sin after sin. And that's what they do. Verse 31. They take Joseph's robe, they kill a goat, and they dip the robe in the blood. And they go to their father and they lie through their teeth. They know what it's going to do to their father. And yet, to cover up the sin that they've done, they've got to keep up the lie. They've got to do it. And so they're deceitful to their father. And friends, they had to live with this sin for years. They had to live with a lie that they had created. We have to be very careful. Many of us might lie, not quite in the same way, but we might lie or we might commit a sin, and we might have to live with the consequences for years. The brothers acted in deceit. But my final point is grief. My final emotion is grief. Now, before we look at Jacob's grief, the father is obviously broken. But one of the brothers did what was right. Verse 21, Reuben. When Reuben hears what the brothers are planning, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben was trying to outsmart the brothers. And so Reuben says, and you read this in verse 22, "Shed no blood for him, throw him in the pit." And then his thinking is, we'll throw him in a pit, and later I will rescue him and restore him to the father. Verse 22. Reuben has a plan. And I haven't got time to elaborate on this, but is throwing Joseph into a pit a good thing to do? I'm going to argue no, it's not a good thing. But in the circumstances, what Reuben is trying to do is he is trying to lessen evil as much as he can. Now, if Reuben had stood up against his brothers and said, "No, you will not harm him, let him free," maybe the brothers would have turned on both of them. But it's interesting that the way in which Reuben acts is to try and lessen sin. Now, as we live our Christian lives, it might not always be easy to see what Jesus wants us to do. Sometimes it might be hard. But what Reuben teaches us here is, though there is a limit to what we can do as Christians, we must always try to lesser and limit evil where we can. One of my great Christian heroes is Corrie ten Boom and the whole family, Betsy and Casper. And in the middle of Nazi occupation in Holland, could they have stopped Nazi Germany? No. Could they have saved the lives of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And then it goes up to hundreds of Jewish people? Yes. They could not stop evil as Christians, but they lessened it as much as they could. And I think that's what Reuben's doing. He doesn't stop evil, but he tries to restrict it. In our families, in our workplaces, in society, Christians should be trying to lessen evil all that we can. And when Reuben goes back and he finds out that Joseph has been sold, he mourns. He tears his clothes, and he is in great distress. Reuben tried, but failed to save Joseph. And then as we close, Jacob is distraught. The father's favorite son murdered. Verse 35, all of his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. What Jacob was saying is, no, I'm sad now and I'm going to die sad. Friends, grief and death are real, and they are hard and they are vile, and death is the last great evil. It is vile. It is horrible. It is unnatural. It's not the way God created the world in Genesis 1 and 2. Death is wrong. Death is vile. And Jacob's response in his mourning is a response that many of us go through. Have you ever felt that I can never be happy again? I can never be comforted again. A part of me has died with my loved one. The big difference here is that his brothers could have comforted Jacob. They could have comforted him by simply saying, Dad, he's alive. We don't know where he is, but we can go and look for him. But your son is alive. And for years they hid the truth. And their father grieved and mourned. Friends, I just want to touch on grief very quickly just to say this. One day Jesus Christ will trample death. Jesus Christ's resurrection provides life everlasting, life eternal, life that death cannot pluck away or steal. In Jesus Christ there is life. But as for our story in Genesis 37, what an absolute depressing mess, isn't it? However, there's one more verse. My favorite word in the whole of this passage, the beginning of verse 36, meanwhile. While there is grieving, while there is sadness, while there is tears, while there is mourning, while there is hatred and greed and deceit reigning, meanwhile, at that moment, at that time, in the midst of this chaos, God was working out his plan. For Joseph wasn't dead. Where was Joseph? Joseph was where God wanted him, in the service of Potiphar, an officer to Pharaoh. Friends, in the dark days of your life, you might be asking, where's God? What's he doing? Where is Jesus Christ in my life? Jesus Christ is alive. All things are under the Messiah's feet. Do we need that reminder this evening? That all the evil and vileness and injustice that is raging in this world, it might seem like darkness is winning, but meanwhile, God is still working. God is still perfecting his perfect plan for salvation of people. Evil does not win. Evil is not even winning today. Evil was not winning in Genesis 37. They killed their brother, they killed the dream. Oh no, God says, my plans, my purposes will come to pass. Joseph is alive. His dreams are alive. God's plan is alive. Friends, today, the Lord lives. Christ is alive. The Lord is reigning. In your struggles and hardships, never forget, God is still reigning. He is still working out his plan. There is hope, even in grief. Amen.